Fully Volunteer for Animals. This is the 6th in our series of webinars exploring areas of the human-animal bond. For anyone who's not familiar with GoToWebinar, I wanted to let you know that everyone except the presenter is going to be in mute mode. This will allow for no distractions and a clear presentation. However, there is a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and you should be free to put in any questions or comments. There may be a point in the presentation where Hillary asks you for input. Please do that in the chat box. Also, if you have any technical issues, let us know there. We'll try and work you through it. I'm very happy today to welcome our presenter, Hillary Exon Hager, who will be talking about ways to turn a passion to help animals, along with your experience and interests, into great volunteer experiences in the animal protection and animal care worlds. Hillary is currently the director of the National Volunteer Center at the Humane Society of the United States, where she oversees the recruitment, training, and management issues for volunteers who work in a wide variety of ways for animals, at direct care centers, helping with ballot initiatives, assisting with rescues, and many other activities. Hillary has a master's degree in nonprofit leadership from Seattle University. She began her service career in the Peace Corps in Mongolia, then came home to work in volunteer management at an agency serving people. But her love of animals soon prevailed, and she has now spent more than 11 years managing volunteers in animal welfare environments. She has also volunteered herself at all levels of animal welfare, including work at a wildlife rehab center in Washington State and serving on several boards of directors of animal welfare groups at the state and local levels. I think you'll learn quickly today how passionate Hillary is about engaging volunteers in work for animals and helping potential volunteers find work that they will find both meaningful and fulfilling. I'm happy to turn over the presentation now to Hillary Hager. Hillary, take it away.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Joan. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody. So glad to be here and so glad to kind of take this time and talk about getting involved as a volunteer. You know, obviously, as Joan said, I have a lot of experience both as a volunteer and then also managing volunteers. And I have to say, probably my favorite, there's so much that I love about it. One is that I get to feel a little bit like I'm facilitating a process for people to really get close to what they are passionate about. And so many people are so passionate about animal issues. I feel like I get to live vicariously through them getting excited and getting engaged in this work. And also, of course, the more people we have doing this work, the better it is for animals altogether. And I had the experience of volunteering and being a volunteer manager at the same time, and so it's helpful for me not only to talk. I do work and I train volunteer managers on running effective programs, but it just has gotten really clear to me that there's some work we can do with volunteers to make sure that they're finding the right organization right off the bat. So anytime I do a presentation, I feel like it's an opportunity to force people to look at my pets. And so these are my guys here, Kellen's the golden retriever, and my cats, Cheddar, Sunshine, and Hambone. They're all very cute. And then here's a picture of me, not nearly as cute, I'm afraid, as the animals there. You know, I've been involved with HSUS now for, almost 7 years. I started by presenting a workshop at Animal Care Expo, which is a training program for animal care professionals, and then quickly got involved with teaching classes on volunteer management for Humane Society University and writing an article in Animal Sheltering magazine, which is a great resource around the animal care field. And I love this work, and I feel so fortunate to have come to HSUS. I started almost 2 years ago now in our volunteer center, and it's like my dream job. And the fact that I get to do it from my home office in Washington State is like the icing on the cake. So to get started here, I think, you know, there strangely and sort of crazily tends to be a little bit of tension between organizations who are in need of help and then the people who want to help. And it's sort of a surprise because, you know, everybody people who have animals in care are desperate, who are working on animal issues often are desperate for the help, but they don't get, there's just a bit of a disconnect. So lots of people want to help, lots of people need help, But then there are all these misconnections that happen. Research indicates that 80% of volunteers surveyed said that the main reason they chose to volunteer was because they were asked. So that's 80% of people volunteering in organizations say the #1 reason they chose to get involved is because someone simply asked them. However, when you look at those numbers in the animal protection field, 80% of volunteers had to seek the opportunities out themselves. So in my mind, this really means that animal organizations don't often do a very good job of asking for the help that they need. And also, my experience in animal groups, from chimpanzee sanctuaries to wildlife rehabilitation centers to foster-based rescue groups to now MINSA in the United States, I think what happens is that a lot of times we're so busy, all of us, working to save animals' lives and just trying to put one foot in front of the other because lives are at stake in our work, we don't always take the time to put into place the structure that will really allow us to best engage volunteers in our work. And so, I'm thinking that many of you are volunteers. Sorry, I'm still getting over a cold. Sorry, I had that terrible flu. Don't get that. It was bad. So, some of you are maybe volunteers, and some of you may be running programs. And it's amazing to me. I do these trainings with volunteer programs all the time, and there are challenges. I mean, it's so much work, and the volunteer managers are really sort of caught in the middle between trying to be, they're accountable to volunteers and their experience, and also accountable to the organization, the staff, and the mission of the organization. So it's tricky for them. So this is interesting to me to be sort of giving you guys the behind the scenes, hey, here's some of the stuff that I talk to volunteer program managers about. Here's what you might experience as a volunteer, and here's how you can kind of negotiate that system of it. So first, I think it would be helpful to kind of explore the different volunteer opportunities that are out there and available in this broad field of animal protection. It shows up and looks like lots of different things. I mean, there really is an interest group for nearly every species of animal and opportunities that encompass every single type of activity imaginable. So you just have to kind of poke around and think about what it is you want to do and which kind of animals you want to work with, whether you want to do hands-on or not, and then sort of apply yourself in that way. So animal shelters, of course, often involve direct care opportunities to homeless, orphaned, or injured animals, but they also frequently have support roles that don't involve any animal contact at all, like fundraising, administrative support, web design, etc. I think a lot of times people think of animal shelters and they think about walking dogs or petting cats, but really in a lot of places the need is much greater, and the ability to plug people into that work is really sort of endless. Then there are zoos or exotic animal sanctuaries. These can involve a lot of animal care without a lot of animal contact, right, like cleaning enclosures, but never having hands on the animals themselves. There are also often lots of administrative non-animal roles available, like outreach and education, tour guides, or docents. It's a great opportunity for people who are looking to learn and who love to educate. That is a great fit. Wildlife rehab is another category, and it's one I'm biased toward myself because I have been volunteering now for 4 years in a wildlife rehab center. And so, it gives an opportunity to have contact with animals that you would never ordinarily have the opportunity to interact with because they're wild. Of course, these jobs often involve lots of cleaning. It can be very dirty work, but the payoff is in helping to provide treatment to animals who can be released back into the wild. Most of these centers will often have other opportunities like maintenance, groundskeeping, those kinds of things as well. But the animal contact need is, the animal care need is often really high, and really people should be ready to get dirty. I get really dirty doing that work. So then the next one is around habitat restoration and land trust. We at HSUS have the Humane Society Wildlife Land Trust, and we have lands that have been deeded to us to maintain a safe place for the animals and habitat for animals in wild environments. And so we have volunteers who go out and monitor those sanctuaries. But there are lots of other forms of habitat restoration, like planting native species, removing invasive species, all of those kinds of things that aren't necessarily the first thing people think about, but of course having habitat, animals need to have habitat to survive, so making sure they have a space to be is another way to participate in something that really has a lot of environmental impact as well. So then there's providing foster care, with shelters or breed-specific rescues. This sort of volunteering is much more intimate, much more emotionally involved, but really goes a long way to increasing the capacity of organizations to care for animals in need. There's a finite amount of space in any, building with walls in order to really accommodate animals. So having the ability to put animals into foster homes really does increase the ability to save lives, but it is a challenge. Not everybody is suited for it, I would say, especially if you're like me and you fall in love with them and wind up being what we call a failed foster, where they never go back to the shelter to be adopted, but instead wind up in your home. So the next option, or the next opportunity really, is around advocacy, both legislative and also corporate advocacy, you know, taking action with decision makers and other stakeholders to make changes that benefit animals at a corporate or legislative level. So this really tackles some of the root causes of cruelty and suffering of animals, something that, you know, we do a lot of work around at the Humane Society of the United States. So there's not a lot of animal contact, but there's really a huge potential to influence the lives of a lot more animals than you'd be able to impact through direct care. Another thing in terms of a big scope opportunity is around spay and neuter. Of course, the fewer animals there are in need of homes, the easier it'll be sort of for everyone. So this is preventive work to facilitate sterilization of intact animals. So, you know, some groups actually have clinics where they need volunteers to come and help and you know, help with surgery prep and help with cleanup and or help with making appointments. There are lots of different ways to get plugged in. There's also trap, neuter, and return. So, you know, we have volunteers, people who go out and trap cats and bring them into open appointments at those clinics, or offering transport for owners who are who need help getting their animals into the clinic because they're not able to do that themselves. Another option is humane education. So a variety of programs offer the opportunity to education with children about humane ethics and responsible care for animals. You know, the idea is that children have a tremendous influence over their families of origin, so there's the potential for impact that goes beyond just that child and the way that they carry themselves in the world, but also they can impact the behavior in their own families. And then finally, there's also disaster response, and that's obviously a huge part of what we do at HSUS, but there are opportunities for training so that you can be a responder in your own community, or deployment with Humane Society of the United States, and there are a bunch of other national groups who deploy volunteer responders. For us at HSUS, it's not just in disasters that are natural disasters, although of course we respond in that way, like to Joplin with tornadoes or flooding in North Dakota, or most recently Hurricane Sandy, but also man-made disasters like you know, like dog fighting rings or cockfighting rings, or puppy mill busts, or hoarding cases where the animals come into our custody and we wind up needing to provide care to them over some period of time. So there are lots of different ways, and you know, and this is probably even a limited list. I just think it's important to think about there being a broad scope, because again, often people are thinking walking dogs, walking cats, and either there's not a really easy place for them to plug into that, or they might have trouble getting into an organization, or people get turned off to volunteering because it seems like it would be too emotionally challenging. There are lots of different ways that people can help. So these factors to consider really are around, you know, whether you want animal contact or not, if you want a formal program to plug into, or if you're one of those types that just wants to be able to take action on your own individually. Also, you might wonder or think about whether or not you want to be a leader, or you're willing to take on a leadership role, or if you would be comfortable just being a member. I mean, of course, you could start out as a member and then move to a leadership role, but I think a lot of times people have this vision of themselves being involved at a leadership role where there may not be space in the program for that to happen. So, you know, I say that nirvana sort of happens where your needs and the organization's needs meet. So really thinking about what your needs are and understanding what the organization's needs are will help you to figure out if it's really a good fit. And my experience is actually that a lot of times people, maybe on both sides, the organization doesn't really identify clearly what their needs are, so that when people come, they're not able to plug them in effectively, but also that volunteers sometimes don't think. I mean, they have this idea that they want to help, but they don't really wrap their heads around what that helping looks like, what it's going to feel like, how it's going to go. Then they come and join an organization, and either their needs aren't met, or it really just does not what they were expecting from their engagement, and it's not a good fit. So thinking about it ahead of time, I think, is really essential. And, you know, thinking about finding work you want to do that's satisfying is huge, but also consider ways, I think it's important volunteers consider ways that they can be of more service by not working with animals at all. You know, and as an insider from several different types of organizations, I have to say I think there's usually not a shortage of people willing to do that direct care for the animals. And that's not always true, of course. Every community is different, but more people are thinking about that animal care piece. it's finding folks who want to do all of the other very important but significantly less warm and fuzzy work that's the challenge. And my hope when I'm looking for a volunteer to participate in a program of mine, and what I say to people is that I am hoping that they want to help us in the way that we need to be helped, not just to pursue their own agenda. Now, of course, my hope is their agenda is to help us, and so them pursuing it will work out just beautifully. But that's not always the case. If somebody really wants work experience, but I don't have something that's really going to give them experience that's going to help them in a job role, then there's automatically going to be some tension and conflict there. So we'll come back to this here in a little bit, but it's just sort of a framework for looking at this. I also think that there are many different types of volunteer programs. You know, I use this when I'm talking to volunteer managers. So, you know, there are opportunities where there are no skills needed, you know, like maybe it's moving, well, this is a simplistic example, but, you know, helping to set up an event, or, you know, like moving tables, moving one pile of rocks to another, scooping poop, you know, like at one of our animal care centers we have, you know, like 1,100 animals, horses and cattle, and we needed to have people on poop scooping duty. Like really all they needed to be able to do was scoop and put it into a wheelbarrow and stay out of the way of the animals. There wasn't any high-level training that was required. The other end of the spectrum, though, is that highly skilled work. You know, if you need somebody who's going to be a veterinarian, or somebody who has very specific skills like pro bono legal work that they can apply using their licensure or their medical skills. But most of the opportunities in organizations really fall into this middle category where we don't need people to be experts, and there is some skill involved, but we're not going to screen to make sure people have those skills before they come. So in my mind, what that really means is that the organization is responsible for providing that training. And unfortunately, what I've seen happen is that there is this training that's required. It's not, I mean, it's not rocket science, but there are ways that things need to be done in an animal care environment. But groups don't always set their volunteers up for success with providing that training. So there's a gap sometimes. So they say, hey, we need help. Volunteers show up. They don't really get instructed on how to do what they need to do. And then they wind up running into trouble because the staff hasn't given them what they need in order to succeed. Now, of course, this isn't true in every organization, and there are lots of groups who have this together. I just sort of put it out there that I think sometimes this is an area where there's tension or conflict. So the next thing, here's my carrot and stick, is to think about what the motivating factors are for you as a volunteer. Like really, really, why are you getting involved? So sometimes it could be just the sort of broad category of giving back. You know, sometimes people have adopted animals from a shelter and they want to help other animals to get good homes, or they just in their own families or their own cultures have a real strong ethic around participating and contributing to the community, which is great. There's also, as I mentioned just a moment ago, the intention of gaining some skills that are applicable. I mean, I really feel like it's our responsibility in this field to provide a lot of learning opportunities for folks, not only around our missions and our values and the way we see the world so that we can get people on board and to kind of help spread the good word about what we're doing, but also so that we can create a new generation of people who are going to be involved in this work. So if it's direct animal care, great. If it's learning how to, you know, run campaigns on particular issues, fantastic. But for volunteers, you know, if their goal is to gain skills, it's important to think about whether or not they're going to be able to in the program they might be considering. Also, being around like-minded people. You know, it's a nice place to meet people that you might want to hang out with when you know that they care as deeply about a particular issue as you might yourself. Also, sometimes people get involved because they see that there's something wrong in the world and they want to be a part of fixing it. You know, they're solutionary people and they want to get involved and take action on it. And so, you know, that's huge. Of course, that's, I think, that comes up a lot for the people who get involved in our work at HSUS. They really want to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. Other people have very specific skills that they want to apply to a specific issue, right? So they're an attorney and perhaps they want to help people keep their pets when there are housing disputes. Or they are veterinarians and they want to participate in providing pro bono vet services. Or they are web designers and they want to help a small group with increasing and improving their web presence. All of those things are great. So you know what goods you've got and you're trying to figure out how you can help a specific organization meet their needs. Also, there's this living in alignment with your values. If you have strong ethic around, you know, like justice for animals, and you want to get involved, being aligned with your own values is important. It's an important factor when you think about how you want to spend your free time. So I guess I'm curious, like, what other motivating factors might people have when they are thinking about what kind of organization they want to get into? I'd love to hear from any of you. If you would, over there in the chat field, you know, where it says type message here, you can select options. I mean, I won't spend too much time, but if anybody has anything that I left out of here in terms of motivating factors, I would love to hear it. Crickets? Crickets? All right, hearing none, unless, yeah, we can come back to it if anybody pipes in. So maybe it was just that I was so thorough. You guys you can't think of anything else that might cause you to get involved. It's great. I like it when I cover it. So, okay, so this principle is sort of a guiding principle for me in all my work, and now my team, I've got a team of 2 staff people, say this to me all the time. I'm so delighted it's taking root. Either that or they're making fun of me for saying it all the time. But really, I have a really strong ethic around asking for what you want in hopes you might get it. I'll tell you, this is something that I see this come up a lot. Like, it comes up on a bunch of different levels, like in organizations, in work groups, in relationships. I mean, it happens all the time. So often we don't ask for what we want, and then when we get upset when it doesn't happen. You know, like saying to people, we need volunteers and we need people to help, but then not saying what help looks like or how it would be most beneficial and how people can really get involved. And I really feel like it's incumbent upon the organization to really make clear what they're looking for in volunteers, so people can self-select into the organization, and volunteers have a clear idea of what the requirements are for volunteering, and find out if an organization can meet their own needs before they make a commitment. And so when I do my volunteer management trainings a lot, I'm talking about this thing and encouraging people to really give some good thought about what's going to work for them. So to that end, this next slide is one that I include in a lot of my volunteer trainings, where, and I found that the majority of organizations don't have anything in writing that really outlines in this level of detail what kinds of things they want in their volunteers, and I'm always encouraging them to do that. You know, is it important that people aren't squeamish, or that they're flexible, that they have a commitment to following the rules and they are safe, they understand the commitment, they're responsible, thorough, observant, sensitive, good listeners, calm and collective, communicative, that they support organizational policy, that they exhibit common sense, which is always my favorite one, because I have never in my life met anyone who admits to not having common sense. They're like the last people on the earth who to find out that they don't have it. But you know, these are things. This is not an exhaustive list. There may be things in a lot of organizations that that they really need. And if that's the case, I'm always telling organizations to make it clear from the very beginning. These are the things that we're looking for, so that volunteers and prospective volunteers can identify with it. Like, am I willing to do that? Am I willing to follow the rules and be safe? Am I able to be as communicative as the organization needs me to be? Is this who I am? And if the answer is yes, then it's worth moving on to the next bit of the conversation. And if not, then, you know, I am always encouraging people to move on to another organization. And I love it when volunteer managers really do have a good handle on what other opportunities exist in their community, so that they can refer people to something that might be a good fit. So the flip side of this, of course, is to identify, for prospective volunteers, to identify the characteristics of their own ideal volunteer opportunity. And, you know, a lot of times when you go into a job interview, you've identified the deal breakers. You know, what will you need in order to be satisfied with your experience? Like, these are my salary requirements. These are my my schedule requirements. These are the benefits I'm looking for. You know, people come to job interviews with those kinds of things in mind often, but they don't often do it when they come to a volunteer program. And so this stuff is key. If the program can't meet your needs, then don't bother going down that road with them. I think many organizations provide multiple opportunities that can provide options for people looking with hands-on versus support type engagement, but they may not offer the same kinds of flexibility about whether the positions are focused on the animals versus working with people. In my old organization, I worked in a couple of different shelters, but my last shelter, every single volunteer was responsible for customer service because we recognized our customers were the adopters who were going to get the animals into good home. So we didn't have any volunteer opportunities that were just working with animals. So, you know, when people would come to a volunteer orientation and say, you know, well, I think I'd like to volunteer here because I don't really like people, and I enjoy spending time with animals more. That was a little bit of a flag for me to make sure to talk to them and say, hey, actually, you know, we are reliant on people. Of course, all of the other volunteers are people, and the staff who are here are people. So you need to be able to like people and understand that, you know, everyone needs to be able to have a conversation with a member of the public, and there aren't any just, you know, positions that are about petting cats and petting dogs. Although, you know, there are some other organizations who have finally given into it, and they actually have created positions that are just petting opportunities. I mean, every organization's different, but you've really got to think about how that's going to, what you want and whether your organization can meet it. There also may not be flexibility about whether the program's highly structured or not, whether you'll have the opportunity to hang out socially or with other volunteers. It may be more task-oriented. So, you know, or it's also possible that the individual tasks you're asked to help with really aren't all that fun. You know, in my own volunteer experience at the Wildlife Center, I did all kinds of tasks that were really, I have to say, would not be classified as fun. You know, like ones that caused me to wind up covered in raccoon poop because I was hosing enclosures. Like, there's nothing really fun about that by itself. But what I was looking for there was to really be about helping the organization meet their mission. And so for me, whether the job itself was fun or not, I was clear that it was getting the necessary work done. And actually that was the part that was fun, of course, and the people were fun, and learning about the animals was fun, and getting to hold and interact with animals like bald eagles and coyotes are just, it's amazing, and you can't substitute that anywhere else. That part was fun. The cleaning the raccoon cages, I would say not so much. So as a volunteer manager, I'm really aware that not all volunteers share that same perspective. Like, they do want fun. And sometimes I think people often just want to work towards an organization mission to the extent that that is fun and easy. And it's tough because I get it. Like, why would you do something that isn't fun? But at the same time, I think it's about really taking another look at what fun could be. And sometimes it is fun to commiserate with other people about how dirty you got, or to complain, or not to complain, but to commiserate about how hard a particular task was. You know, I think both organization and volunteers need to be clear about where they are on that, and to the extent that they can, make it a fun place to spend time, and the interactions with other people and kind of the culture of the organization. That will go a long way to overcoming the need for each individual task to be super fun and exciting. So I guess, I don't know if I'll be able to get you guys, let me see if I can get anybody to post here. So these are some of the things that I have thought of that would be important, or that some people might identify as characteristics of their ideal volunteer opportunity. Being flexible, having it be a learning environment. Some people might want it to be really intense. Some people might want it to be casual, hands-on or not. That they would want a social scene, or for it to be people-centered versus animal-centered, structured or flexible. Are there any other things that people might include to this list that they would want to see in a volunteer program that they are kind of scoping out to participate in? Again, that would be in the chat box there. Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any there, so I'm going to, if anybody does add something. Wait. Hey. All right, Stephanie. Thanks. So using technology skills. Yeah, that's a good one. That's really applying those skills that you bring to the table and plugging them in immediately. Some people are into that, and some people want to do something that they have never done before, or they want to separate their work life and their volunteer life, which I think is great too. Yeah, being able to make a difference, yeah, that's also pretty huge. I think that really makes it incumbent upon the organization to identify, to let people really get a handle on how what they're doing is making a difference. It's not always immediately evident, and so I think that can be really frustrating for people when they're not sure how what they're doing fits into the bigger picture. But making a difference is huge, absolutely. Okay, well, so if anything else occurs to anybody, feel free to, we can come back to that. So, hold on. Okay, so now having said all that, so now you're thinking about like what your goals are, what your requirements are for a volunteer role, what your motivations are, how all those fit together. Then the next piece is to really think about where you can volunteer, right? So I wanted to include this just to kind of share with you all. So we have a bunch of volunteer opportunities here at the Humane Society in the United States. And so it's humanesociety.org/volunteer is where this image on the left comes from. It's our landing page. And in it, we've got all of our different programs and what's involved in the volunteer program and how it works and all that kind of stuff. But what we recognize is that, you know, it's honestly, it's less important to us that people volunteer with us than it is that they simply take action. And so really all over our page, we say to people like, hey, here's what we've got. But if this doesn't seem like it's going to be a good fit, or you're not seeing something that really floats your boat here, then go to VolunteerMatch.org, which I'll show you in a second. We're just about to launch this thing that's here on the right, which is how to find the volunteer opportunities in your state. So this is like a little sneak peek, but the way this will work is that you can click on the state that you are most, or where you're living, and then you'll see a list of opportunities. And the list will include not only national opportunities, like our animal rescue team, or things that you can do from sort of wherever you are and be deployed to do. We also have opportunities that you can do wherever you are from your home to help programs in our organization. And then in some states, of course, we do have on-the-ground opportunities because we have a care center or because we have another program that's actively engaging volunteers. This map should be, I mean, it'll show a lot of the same stuff, obviously, but it's kind of a different way to organize the information. And this thing should be going live here pretty quickly. But I wanted to give you a sneak peek. I'm super excited about it. Also, as a geography major, so I really like maps. I can't help myself. And that's the way it makes sense to me. So I talked to you already about VolunteerMatch. VolunteerMatch is a great organization. It really is the largest way of finding volunteer opportunities, the biggest and best way, in my opinion. I mean, there are lots and lots and lots of programs out there that help sync people up with opportunities. VolunteerMatch is great, and you can click on Find Opportunities and enter the keyword animal, and then search by your zip code and find opportunities around you. So I'm always talking to people about how to organizations to make sure that they're listing their volunteer opportunities there. You know, I did a quick Google search here, and you can see in 0.22 seconds, I had over 162 million results, and a lot of those actually were matchmaking websites where people list opportunities and you can search for opportunities. And certainly, you know, if there are ones that are closer to community, like a volunteer center or the United Way in your area, they often will be sort of a clearinghouse for volunteer opportunities in a local community. So there are lots of ways to do it. What I like about VolunteerMatch is that it's really explicit. You can search that animal piece, and if that's what you want to do, that's where you can find something that's fitting there. Petfinder.com is another site. They have lots of different resources. You may have heard about it. You know, people use it to take photos of animals that are available for adoption and post them on the web so that they can get as much exposure as possible. They also have a section called Helping Pets that is highlighted sort of on the right-hand side, and if you look at that, there's information about how to find the right organization, how you can help without being a volunteer in an organization but provide support to shelters by doing food drives or you know, or tabling, or there are all kinds of things you can do without working in an organization that fall into that category of kind of working as a independent operator. But if you don't find your local organization in VolunteerMatch, if they're not recruiting volunteers there, you can actually look here and search shelters nearest you and then contact those organizations directly via the website or any phone number or anything that they have listed. So if VolunteerMatch doesn't have it, Pet Finder likely will, if you're looking for you know, work with companion animals. You know, obviously wildlife centers are probably not going to be listed on Pet Finder, or some of the other advocacy groups will likely not be listed there. So here are a couple of hints from, that's a new picture to me, I love that. Hints from an insider. You know, I think, how do I want to say this? I think this is something that's a challenge. Like from the program's perspective, you know, they sometimes will get really clear on what they want and post stuff all over their website and put it together in such a way that it's really hard for people to find a phone number to actually call. And I am aware that they do that because they feel like all of their information is already on the website, so like why would they want to keep talking about it over and over again? So the first step, I would say, if you are considering volunteering in an organization, is really to look at the website that the organization has for as many details as possible. Often they will outline all of the different volunteer opportunities, and they'll talk about any restrictions and requirements, and the process. They might even have applications online. All of that stuff is there. Sometimes, though, it's not there, and you might need to attend an orientation so that you can learn as much as you need or want in order to make a decision about how to proceed. And so, I think on the one hand, people might feel frustrated about going to an orientation just, like because they're having to invest time that maybe it would have been easier to learn over the phone. But I think, worst case scenario, you go to an orientation, you learn more about what that organization is doing in your community, and even if it's not a right fit, you might walk away knowing more than you did when you walked in the room. And so the other piece is that this can really be frustrating on both ends. A dirty little secret that I've discovered in doing this work is that some organizations have really complex orientation and screening processes because they assume that the people they don't want in their program will give up and that the really great volunteers will be the ones that stick it out. And that actually doesn't really mesh with my experience, which is that often the people who are going to be a great fit are like, geez, why is this so complicated? Why do I have to work so hard to help? And they sort of drop off through the process. But the people who stick it out and who are really persistent are maybe not always the ones, I mean, this isn't always true, but they may not be the ones who are right fit. So having that be part of your screening to screen out the undesirable volunteers is sort of crazy. And I talk to people and they do that. I mean, groups really do that sometimes. Not all of them, of course, but some people do. And, sometimes you may need to make a phone call to talk to somebody before you go. I guess to an orientation, or if you're not finding the information you need on the website, you may need to go and either meet with them in person or have a phone call. And so that piece can be frustrating too, that you have to work so hard to get the information you want. And in the meantime, the volunteer manager may be just thinking, my gosh, why don't you just come and just do it? But really, it's important that everybody take the time and really make sure it's a good fit. And volunteer managers often, in shelters in particular, often have huge assumptions that people who are coming to them without having any idea about what it'll really be like, and that once they find out, they won't really want to participate anymore. So they're expecting, their whole process is around people dropping out once they actually tell them what's going to be involved. So going into a program with an open mind and thinking, well, how am I really going to plug myself in here, is going to be huge, because they're not always going to be thinking about how they can plug you in to really maximize your skills. They're probably just thinking about meeting their most immediate need, whether that's really capitalizing on your skills and interests or not. So the other piece, so say that you go to an organization and you're clear that your needs are going to be met and they feel like you're a good fit and you decide to move down this process. The next step is to be a really great volunteer. Obviously there's some things here that are pretty, I think, self-explanatory, but I think need to be said nonetheless, right? Don't overcommit, and we're all busy. All of us are busy. And sometimes it seems like people are just busy being busy, right? So thinking about really realistically what your time commitment is and how you're going to fit this into your life over the next, whatever the minimum commitment is, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, it's huge. And if you know that you're going to be moving, or your work schedule is going to be changing, or your school schedule is going to be changing, and there's going to be some change of commitment, it's really important to think about this. I mean, I think most volunteer managers would rather not have somebody start volunteering if they know things are going to change than to start and then have things not go well, or this, schedules change and then all of a sudden they're back at square one trying to fill a slot again. The next is to be punctual. Be there when you say you're going to be there. Let them know if you're not going to be there. Follow through. Follow the rules, and focus on the organization's needs. And this part's hard. I mean, it seems easy to say, follow the rules. But I think a lot of times organizations don't do a very good job of explaining why the rules are the rules. And so it doesn't immediately to people seem to make sense that they need to follow them, or why it makes sense to follow them. And this is something I talk to volunteer managers about a lot, to explain the why of the rules, not just what the rule is. And particularly in animal care environments, the stakes are very high. When mistakes are made around cleaning protocols or animal handling, it really does put the animals at risk. And of course, it puts the people at risk. So understanding that the rules are in place for a reason and really wrapping your head around and making a commitment to following those rules is essential. And if you are a person who finds a better way to do something, or has identified something, or has questions about it, always go talk to a coordinator about it first. Don't sort of like freelance or freestyle your own method of doing things, because sometimes there are other pieces at play that aren't immediately available that really can have an impact on the quality of the experience for the animals and other people. So, I mean, I think you guys probably are pretty hip to that. That's what being a good volunteer means. And that said, sometimes people want to volunteer in programs because they want to be able to make a change in an organization. You know, there are lots of great programs out there, and there are lots of programs that really struggle, which is true in every field, regardless. It's not just in animal fields, but, you know, people get involved because they love animals and they want to help them. And then when they get involved in the organization, they really are able to realize very quickly that it would be better if things were done in a different way, or they see some things that feel really obvious, and they want to help, but then and they want to make suggestions, but then that can lead to tension, because, you know, I always say to volunteer managers, you know, we want volunteers who are going to change the world, but we don't always want volunteers who want to change our world. And so I include this information here because I think there are ways for volunteers to make change as from a member position, right? They may, like we talked about earlier, deciding whether or not you want to be a leader or a member. Sometimes there aren't opportunities for people to be leaders in the volunteer program, and so people have to sort of try to create change and make influence decisions from a member position. And so my keys for volunteers who are wanting to be a part of the organization, an organization that isn't perfect, that maybe needs some work, and they want to be a part of that solution, is to really go in and build those strong relationships first. And to me that means do anything the staff asks you to do, let no task be too grimy. Also to give the staff the benefit of the doubt and assume that they love animals just as much as you do. And I think that's something that is tough in animal environments. You know, we all love animals so much and we are so connected to them in our own lives that we start to doubt people when they aren't exhibiting the same level of affection or the same level of, I'm not sure what. We just don't think that they love animals the way that we do, and then that becomes our story. And, you know, working in animal organizations is a hard road to hoe, and people are choosing it because they care about animals. And so, you know, it is really difficult, and that means that they don't wear their heart on their sleeves every day, and they come in to get as much work done as they can. So having a lot of grace and benefit of the doubt for staff is, I think, key. Also showering them with kindness. In some organizations that are under attack, it's very nerve-wracking to invite volunteers in, knowing that there's a potential for people to be very critical from close up once they're a part of the program. So, you know, reinforcing the message that the organization has community support and showering them with kindness, even if it's just bringing in snacks or flowers or something, offering your help wherever you can, being consistent and reliable, and then also being rational and non-combative even when there are problems. And again, like, I don't want to give anyone the impression that everything's going to go badly in a shelter, but I recognize sometimes you get in and you're like, geez, this is not what I thought. And you have the choice of either staying and trying to make a difference and participate in transforming the program, or leaving. And that's really the key here, not only because I spend my entire life hoping that I can include Kenny Rogers lyrics into webinars, but really, in the immortal words of Kenny Rogers, you know, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. The deal is that your program can only offer you what it can offer with the resources it has available. And it's possible that it just won't simply ever be able to offer you what you hoped it would. It's sort of like being in love with someone. If they just change 1 or 2 or 10 things about themselves, I think you can offer to partner with the coordinator to implement changes and fill that role. And your offer may or may not be accepted, which means you have a decision to make. So you either have to be at peace with the program and the process as it is, or leave. But I really feel like what you can't do is stay and be miserable and critical of how the program's working and make an uncomfortable environment for the people around you. It really makes it tough for the staff, and it makes it tough for the volunteer coordinator, for sure, because nobody wants to have people around who are making anyone uncomfortable or being critical. You kind of have to embrace the idea that people, like the coordinator, the shelter manager, whomever, that they're doing the best they can every day. And you might wish that they could do more. You might have your suspicion that someone isn't doing all they know they can do to make a difference. But those are things that you can't really change. And the fact is that no one goes to work each day trying to think about how they can fail the animals or make people miserable. And if that organization isn't the right fit for you, I really would encourage people to leave and find someplace else to volunteer. if they can't be at peace with existing in the system as it is. And you can find a way to helpfully and appropriately share your feedback about the program. And it may be put into a great ideas for later pile, or it might not. At the end of the day, you've got to remember that it's about how you fit with the program and not about the program and the people running it. And so, this is supposed to be something that adds to your life and not takes away from it. And unfortunately, what I think happens sometimes is people get involved in a program, it's not what they hoped and it's not what they think should be going on, and then they just they're really embattled and they burn themselves out in a system that's not a good fit for them. And then they wind up leaving the field altogether rather than simply going to another organization. And there's so much work that needs to be done for animals. I really strongly believe that each of us just needs to take our little part and do it as well as we can. And that if all of us are doing our part and all of us are doing the best that we can, that over time it really is making a positive impact for animals. And I think that's a hard lesson because I want it to all be perfect now. And I suspect a lot of other people feel that way. So taking the time to recognize that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and each of us doing our part really is going to help help more animals over time than if we're all struggling alone. So so that's really the end of my prepared remarks. Here's my contact information. If anybody would like to email me or connect with me later about anything that I talked about today or any issues that are going on with you in finding a volunteer opportunity, or if you want to plug in, this information is here. And then I'm happy to take any questions that people might have. I saw that there's a question here about whether or not VolunteerMatch lists Canadian opportunities, and I think that they do, but I'm not sure. If not, there may be sort of an analogous. I think that they do list international opportunities, but to be honest, I didn't look. You might just check. And if not, there's probably an analogous version for the Canadian market.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hillary. A number of comments were put in the question box making clear how important it is for a volunteer to have a well-managed organization or a well-organized program to be going into, and how critical that is to the success of the volunteer experience. So several people had put that in there.
Yeah.
I think which matches exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think it really has to do with people's, I don't know if you guys have heard that term, tolerance for ambiguity. Some people really have a high tolerance for ambiguity, and they're like, I'm fine with going with the flow, and I can just show up and I can feel successful even if there isn't a lot of structure. And others of us, including myself, I feel like I do have a high tolerance for ambiguity, but I really crave and seek out structure. And so that's something to really think about. Some people love it really loosey-goosey, and other people really need the structure. I am always trying to talk to people about that.
A couple of other good questions. One asked, are there any particularly good phrases to ask for what you want, especially from executives?
Huh. About what you want in the volunteer program, I guess.
I'm assuming that it is. I don't know. I'm assuming it is from the volunteer's perspective, or from the volunteer manager's perspective, seeking sort of a high-level input, whether it's volunteer time or program, working with an executive of an outside group.
Yeah. Well, I think, so a couple of things come to mind, and whoever asked that question, if I don't answer it, please speak up and say so. But I think there's kind of two pieces. One is that, a lot of times volunteer managers themselves have to work to get support from executives within their own organization. I mean, executives understand that volunteers are important and they want the help, but, they're not totally aware of all of the different facets of running a volunteer program. So actually we have resources at the Humane Society for training volunteer managers how to be effective managers of volunteers. And one of the pieces there is how to gain executive support for a volunteer program. And I think that some of those pieces are actually very similar to what a volunteer might do if they're trying to interact successfully with executives in a program to get somewhere. I think the first and most important thing that that an individual can do before they meet with an executive is to really educate themselves about what the issues are in their community. And especially in animal sheltering, it's pretty hot button. There are people feel very strongly about it, and there are many roads to Rome, lots of different ways to do things, and some groups are doing better jobs than others. And so learning really what's going on in that particular community and what the issues are that are impacting animal protection in that community versus in other communities around the country, I think is a great way to start. And actually, on the Humane Society website, and I think also on animalsheltering.org, there's information about humane discourse that has a list of different things that research people can do about animal sheltering in their own communities and what some benchmarks are for well-run programs, so that people can, not just volunteer programs, but animal care programs, so people can look and learn and really get a handle on what's out there and what the options are before they go and speak to any executives about changes in the organization. I'd also say, start with the volunteer coordinator. Don't go straight to the executive. There's probably a chain of command, right?
And the questioner has clarified, saying her question relates to the slide that says "ask for what you want" in the hopes that you might get it. So
yes, yep, yeah.
I think that's all.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so for me, it's like it really has to do with all of those other factors we were talking about. Like, what's your motivation? What kind of flexibility do you need and want in your role? Like, I would literally make a list. Like, what do I need from a volunteer opportunity? And you're either going to find out on their website, you're going to find out in an orientation, and if the details that you're really looking for still aren't being discussed, then you would want to schedule time. So it could be like, if you want to be able to apply some skills, like ask, are these skills that are going to be, are these of use in your organization, and how might they apply them? Or, hey, I really want to learn job skills. Can you tell me, are these skills that are covered in the volunteer training program that you have in place? Are they things that I will gain over time? Or do I have access to any additional trainings that you might be offering in the organization or at other shelters in the community? Or, like, how flexible is the time? I mean, some people really can't commit to working the same shift every week. So if that's a requirement, then you'll want to talk to people. Is that true for all opportunities, or are there some opportunities that could be more flexible? I mean, it really has to do with sussing out what your motives are, what you need from your program, and then, having almost like a checklist, and through those different conversations, making sure all of your questions are being answered. Cool.
I have two questions regarding online. The first one was, she's in a rural area. She's in an area that doesn't have in-person opportunities to help farm animal welfare. She's looking for any online opportunities. The second online question is, if you want to volunteer for a shelter, is it better to fill out the online application or to go into the shelter and meet people?
Well, both of those are interesting. So, I will say to the first question about opportunities to help farm animals, we do actually have opportunities on our website that allow people to do work to support our farm animal protection campaign, both the HSU one and then also the Humane Society International campaign on the same issue. And they are remote opportunities that you can do from home. So, if you want to shoot me an email, I can send you a link to those and get you the information that you need. In terms of the second question about whether or not to fill out the online application or go in person, I'm not sure how I'd answer that. I mean, on the one hand, I think it's really nice to see. I mean, I think it would be great before you apply to go in, make sure you know what the organization looks like and what it feels like, and get a sense for it. But I think, if they have a process that has people filling out applications online, it's probably they want it online for a reason. I'm trying to think about, like, in my own shelter, I didn't have a preference. If I saw one on paper and then one online, I wouldn't necessarily have a preference for one over the other. I think it's tough with applications too, because a lot of times a lot of organizations just put those applications without, I mean, they're not even really using it as a way to assess someone's suitability for a role. Not every organization does. It's just like, here's this paper to fill out, but really they want to see you in action before they make a decision about whether or not you're a good fit. So I think go in person. If it's hard, if you can make an appointment with somebody to talk about them, great, but don't feel badly if you can't, because they're likely very busy and struggling to get all their work done, and fill out the application and see how it goes from there.
Cool. I have one other question. How can you learn to become a volunteer manager?
Yeah, well, that's there are lots. I mean, that's a great question, and there are lots of different ways to do it. I mean, I learned how to be a volunteer manager sort of after I got my job as a volunteer manager. I didn't really realize that it was a profession and that people like do it for their whole careers and stuff. And so I got a job and then quickly realized how much I didn't know, and then got really geeky and got as geeky as I could as quickly as I could. So there are lots of resources. Mainside University has a program with a series of different classes. Some are self-paced and some are instructor-led, that will help give you a good foundation for what you need to know, particularly in an animal care environment, although the same concepts are applicable in other sectors as well. We also have a bunch of information at animalsheltering.org around the effective operations of volunteer programs. There are also lots of resources online, like Energize Inc. has lots of good content, and a lot of volunteer programs actually are looking for people to help with running of their programs. So in other words, they're looking for volunteer leaders. So if ultimately volunteer management is your goal, you might consider getting to an organization, getting involved, and then considering taking on some of that administrative piece in support of the volunteer manager. And that will give you a lot of goods. And I think, in my mind, I think having the best fit for a lot of times what happens is that in organizations, a volunteer management position will come open, and there's somebody in the animal care team or somebody who's already involved in the program but doesn't have any volunteer management experience, applies for the job and gets it. And certainly it's something that can be learned, and it's not rocket science, but there are ways to work smarter, not harder. And I think that in my mind, the piece about, volunteer managers really need to like people. They need to like people just as much as, or if not more than, the animals. And not to say that people who are hired internally like animals more, but I think sometimes it gets overlooked, because in most of my work as a volunteer manager, I had very little animal contact. I was working with people so that they could work with animals. And so, having those good, strong people skills, interpersonal skills, conflict resolution, and program development, project management, those are things that I think are really essential in managing programs, the ability to do training, those kinds of things. All of those skills will help make you a more marketable candidate as a volunteer manager, and certainly those are things that we offer both through HSU and then also through animal sheltering.
Terrific. That was the last question that I have pending, and we're just about out of time. So I want to thank you, Hillary Hager, and thanks to everyone who joined us today for what I think has been a very informative webinar. In the next day or so, we'll send out a link to the recording as well as information about other upcoming webinars. I hope you'll feel free to share it with others and anyone who couldn't make the live session who might be able to benefit from the information that Hillary has shared with us today. Please save the date for the next webinar, which is on Tuesday, February 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. This is going to be with Lindsay Sterling Crank, the director of the Prairie Dog Coalition in Colorado. She'll be talking about how we can help save the prairie dog, which is a keystone species in the fragile ecosystem of the American prairie. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a wonderful afternoon.